Good morning, everyone. This is the IPython Jupyter Dev Meeting for December 11th. And as most of us who are in Northern California try to survive this thing called rain that frightens everyone around here, we'll try to get through the agenda. So the first thing we have is, I think, Matthias. Is that you, Matthias? SVG LaTeX on 7106.
Yeah, the display order in the notebook and in NB Convert is not the same. One has SVG with higher priorities than tech, and the other vice versa. And so we have to choose between one or the other. And personally, I prefer to have SVG, PNG grouped together. But if we do that, we might break notebooks that rely on one ordering, which are already published on NB Convert. And if we do the other, it's weird to have SVG, which is separated from PNG and JPEG by tech.
What's particularly weird about separating SVG and PNG?
Thomas, we can barely hear you.
I can hear him fine.
Crank up the gain. Oh, fine.
Sorry. Yeah, so what's weird of having SVG and PNG separated by tech is I felt like JPEG, PNG, and SVG are basically images. So you have this group of, do you want images to be more or less prioritized than tech? And if you have just tech in the middle, it's just like...
No, but I do agree that I do think it's a good idea to make that consistent.
I do. I agree.
The less jarring we make, the smoother we make the experience, and the more we get to the point where it's easy to open something that's live on NBViewer, that is on NBViewer, open it as a live notebook with something like TempNB and other things. The less of a jarring transition we want to create for users.
So the only question is how many notebooks do rely on the fact that SVG has a higher priorities and tech to displacing on NBViewer. If the answer is...
I guess it's roughly 0, since that wouldn't work when you're writing the notebook.
Yeah.
You wouldn't do what you want. So I think making NBViewer match the notebook makes more sense than the other way around.
I think I'm leaning that way as well.
Me too. Yeah. It would be a very weird use case, and I mean, if people want to do very highly customized conversions, the people who really care deeply about highly customized conversions, they're the people who post it on their blogs and who manually control the conversion process, right? And they post it on a separate domain. So I think that people who simply let notebooks show up on NBViewer after they push them to GitHub, they probably saw whatever they had on their screen, and that's what they pushed to GitHub, right? And so let's go with that.
And so we keep tech always more prioritized than any images.
Okay, so those are two questions. One question is whether to go with what the notebook does versus to go with NBViewer. Who moves towards whom?
Yeah, that's what the notebook does.
Yeah. And the second one is whether, in addition, to disentangle LaTeX out of there and move LaTeX out. Now, the notebook does tech before SVG and SVG before PNG?
Yes.
Yes.
And the original logic of that ordering was really SymPy. Mm-hmm. That SymPy can render mathematics using both tech and images.
Yeah.
And if you have tech in that context, I think you universally want to see the tech.
Certainly.
That makes sense so long as the LaTeX is the subset that MathJax can display.
Yes, the alternative is that you've got a tech representation that's what you want in a real LaTeX document, and then you want an SVG or something that should display in the live notebook, because the live notebook actually can't handle the tech that you're putting out.
Yeah. And that's where you could have output ordering in NB Convert that differs based on the format.
like for instance, so the tab IPy package that I've been working on, somebody has added LaTeX representation of tables to that. But in an HTML view, you don't want to see the LaTeX tables. You want to see the HTML tables.
Yeah, but the exporter
That's why
already.
HTML is the highest priority, so that's no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, the most native format. That I think that's unambiguous. That kind of the most native format, which is when it's the same format as the representation or the display context.
Yeah.
Is the absolute
Brian,
highest priority.
does SymPy spit out the PNG and the LaTeX by default, both of them, always?
No. I
Because
forget what the default.
PNG is much too slow. You need to activate everything explicitly. You need to enable notebook and you need to enable
LaTeX or
images.
PNG.
Yeah, they used to do that. So that they could naively just always work in the Qt console and the notebook.
Uh-huh.
Right, because the Qt console didn't render tech, so they published PNG and LaTeX always.
Uh-huh.
I don't think that's the default behavior anymore.
Yeah.
I think
Basically, I'm wondering how much would we break SymPy if we move tech to the back of that list? Would that be a problem? If we keep the images together, what do you guys think?
It's all going to depend on how SymPy users are configuring their display system.
Their sessions.
Yeah. It will. Where that will affect SymPy users is users who are configuring it to output both tech and
PNG.
That will affect them.
We would. Those would be the users who have. So the group of users most likely to do that would be the group of users who have a habit of loading the Qt console simultaneously with the notebook and using a Qt console connected to the notebook as a scratch area. So that could be somebody who would have both PNG and LaTeX active.
Yeah.
Also, the Qt console can actually handle tech now.
Oh, really?
For a year or so.
I didn't know.
So it uses Matplotlib, I think, to just render the tech.
So it's PNG, but the console does it itself instead of waiting.
Okay.
I don't know about that second conversion.
Let's not break the notebook just before release.
Yeah.
We can think about that for 4.
Sounds good. So okay.
Yeah. So just make the NB convert match the notebook for now.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't think they're different on purpose.
Yeah.
No, sounds good. And whatever way got us here sounds like a good choice. All right, 7087.
So someone made a PR so that when you're running from the Qt console and executing code, it happens code cells at the end of the notebook which is currently connected, or any other client. And I think we don't agree on what you should do with message from remote client. I think that to be consistent, you need to happen at the end of the notebook so that it's surpriseless and it's always the same behavior regardless of what interaction you had with the notebook. And I think Min wants the cells to be appended where your current cursor is.
Well, I'm not even sure that appending a cell at all makes sense, but
Yeah. I'm not.
We should clarify this is an optional behavior. This is not something that would be on by default in any case.
Yeah.
It adds the code and the option in the menu to be able to get what you type in another client into the notebook.
I mean, I almost think that this is the type of thing that the integration with real-time collaboration system is going to end up solving. And I think first we're going to solve it in the notebook, and then we could ask the question, okay, well.
No, it's not the same because the real-time collaboration will handle clients that are all working with notebooks. Here we are speaking of things that are published by the pub socket on the kernel for clients that are bound with 0MQ?
Well, but it gets in. I mean, there's two parts of the Google Docs collaboration. One is the document semantics, and the other is the kernel semantics. And this is the kernel semantics.
Sure, but real time won't solve that. The question is like if someone is connected only through 0MQ on the kernel and is executing something, how do you reflect this change in the notebook itself? I think it makes sense to at least append a cell, because someone who is working on I don't know, VI on a server and want to send some code to the front end to the notebook he's working on, just wants to have it appended somewhere.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't know. I'm not convinced. I mean, our traditional idea is that the document is completely separate from the kernel when we're thinking about multiple clients connecting to a single kernel. And this seems to be, this was moving in a direction where we all of a sudden are trying to synchronize the kernel state with the document state of all the different clients, and that's, I just don't know.
Yeah, there's a question. This is something that was added to the terminal in the Qt console.
Yeah.
You can optionally say, rather than discarding the things that fly by from other clients,
right,
show them in some way. And so this is adding a notebook version of things from other people go by, at least let me see them. And I think it's genuinely debatable whether they should add to the document or just show up in a transient kind of way.
Yes, yeah. And yes, I agree.
And I have no idea what the right thing to do for kind of the default. I think it's reasonable to have something that lets you have an equivalent flag in the notebook, right? And that's what this is, optionally turn on, do something other than discard with outputs from other clients. And I'm not sure, I don't know, I guess I'm not sure what the logical default behavior for us would be. I would be somewhat inclined to make it possible in IPython and actually have the UI for it be an extension, or the behavior be an extension, just because there are so many different logical behaviors. That this seems like a good fit for the kind of thing that people can use.
So no operation handler, an handler that just don't do anything but receives a message, so that it's easy to plug.
At least make it possible, because I'm not sure with the kernel API as it is now. I'm not sure there's a method you can call to say do this with messages that aren't from my session.
Yeah, I think that
makes sense.
But I don't know. I mean, maybe it makes sense for us to have a default. I don't know.
Well, I think a good way of starting to explore all this would be to add the APIs to allow people to start to play with it for 3.0, and then just see sort of what happens. See if people come up with interesting and useful ways of displaying that information. And I think that's a reasonable thing to put in, and it lets us not have to tackle the more difficult UI questions about how we show that.
Yeah, because I think the person who opened the PR has kind of two use cases that they described. One was they're working in Vim IPython or something, and they have some rich media, something that they can't view in the terminal, so they use this to just see something in the notebook.
Mm-hmm.
And the other is basically authoring notebooks in Vim using this, and that's why append to the end makes sense, is because they're basically authoring notebooks in Vim.
Yeah. No, I think that's a perfect case where if we give them the right extension points, they can implement the right behavior for their usage cases. Yeah. So would this be an event that gets fired, or a callback registration type thing?
I would do callback registration just because that's what we already have for kernel messages. Is you hook up callbacks, but you hook them up per message.
Yeah.
And I would just have something that matches that, but is for, you say,
foreign.
This is my callback structure for messages not from my session.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very reasonable thing
And
to
it
do.
otherwise is the same as registering callbacks for a specific request.
Yeah. Yeah. Any objections to that plan or comments on it?
I think Scott tried to say something, but I just heard fart. Can anybody understand that?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
Bees syndrome.
Scott's mouth is full of bees.
Can you type it into Gitter, Scott?
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. So, okay. Can Matthias or someone add these comments to that pull request?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, great. So 7108, refactoring the channel classes.
Yeah. So this was me. So I started trying to debug something which involved the kernel. The kernel client has channel classes, and we were trying to use the type system for 3 orthogonal axes, which were the different kinds of channels, shell versus IOPub versus stood-in, the blocking interface versus the Qt signals interface,
Yep.
and in-process versus 0MQ channels. And the result was this horrible tangled mess of multiple inheritance code, and it was next to impossible to work out where everything was coming from. So I waded in and cut it back to something a bit more manageable. So I've taken the distinction of shells, stood-ins, and IOPub channels out of the class system. So now you instantiate them all with the same type, and just attach the same type of instance to different sockets and different attributes. So everybody who's reviewed it seems to agree that it's considerably simpler. It is a significant refactoring to be doing this close to 3.0, but yeah, it would be a lot harder to do this after we've split up the repositories, and I don't know how I can debug that code without doing this, because it is such a thicket of classes inheriting from other classes and mix-ins, and yeah.
So it looks, so everyone considers this to be properly reviewed and all of that. It's just a question of, does this go into 3.0 or not?
Yeah, and I think everybody who's chimed in, including me, says yes.
Okay.
But it's just kind of bringing it up that it's a hairy refactor of some very sensitive code, but it's also it's a big improvement, and it will only get harder to do it as time goes on.
Oh no, I mean, and some of that code was some of the earliest code we wrote for even the Qt console. So this is fantastic.
The earliest.
Yeah, it's really fantastic that this is getting done. I'm fine. I mean, I think we will discover any bugs very quickly in master, and I'm fine with it going into 3.0.
Great, thank you.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for doing that work. That's yeah.
That's right.
Paying off that technical debt. Server extensions, Pandora's box. Woohoo!
Me again. So we have kernel extensions that you load with the loadx magic. We have notebook client-side JavaScript extensions that you can load either in custom.js, or you can now load them. You can specify them in config to be loaded. The one bit that we don't currently allow to be extended is the notebook server, and we've kind of said, we don't want to be building a web framework, but we kind of are building a web framework anyway. And it particularly came up in Site2C. I want to be able to serve a directory of style files, and I can't come up with any sane way of doing it other than extending the notebook server. Yeah. And I don't feel like I should have to subclass the notebook server and define my own script to launch it just to serve an extra directory.
Yeah.
So notebook server extensions, it's pretty simple technically. Like our other things, there is a list of modules that it will load, and then it will look for I think I could load Jupyter server extension function, and it will pass it the application class, and it passes it our like notebook application class, not the Tornado application class, because it's easy to get from our application to the Tornado web app, and hard to get the other way.
Yes. Yeah, so I traditionally I've been one of the voices against this stuff, but I think there's two things that are changing my mind on this quickly. One is that I think as we split our own project into multiple repos, we could end up with a situation where the actual notebook server itself has to pull from a bunch of our own projects that are installed separately, and that basically just register themselves in some appropriate way. And so I think even just from the repo splitting standpoint, we're probably going to have to solve some of this type of thing anyways. And then the second is that if we go down the route of Phosphor, I think we will end up doing something like this as well, so people can plug different components into the Phosphor layout system. And so I'm fine doing this, although I think the APIs we're going to use for it after we do the repo splitting will be completely different possibly, but I'm fine with something going into 3.0 so that you can, your Site2C stuff can work.
Great.
Is this, I just was able to get back online. Is this 7083? Just so I plug my brain back in?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So do we want to flag this in any way as experimental and temporary APIs to convey that?
Yeah.
In the docs and put a warning box in the docs about that?
I think so, and
especially because this is the likelihood of this surviving unchanged, the repo splitting and the reorganization that is likely to come next year is basically zero, right? It's impossible to foresee right now what that is going to look like.
Yep. No, I'm totally fine. Putting this in, declaring it as experimental, and I think the chances of it having to change are nearly certain.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we may need to do something like this for the widgets, for example. I don't know, but it's not obvious how we're going to split that off, and I think we're going to have to tackle all those questions when we do so. But yeah,
and having things like the widgets and Site2C and maybe something that Doug Blank may be doing as examples will help us figure out what's a good common solution for all of those use cases.
Yeah. So no, I think this is a.
Thomas, it seems like it needs a rebase, right?
I hadn't noticed, but that may well be the case. It should be fairly simple to do if it does.
Okay.
Yeah. And one thing we should do when we get around to that is to study how other web frameworks handle this type of modularity and extensibility.
Yeah, it might be some kind of declarative or whatever structure of, like, this is my list of module application thingies and URL mapping and.
Yeah, no, I mean it's the JavaScript, it's the CSS, it's the templates, it's the mapping of the handlers to URLs. I mean, it's a bunch of different things, and we'll just we'll figure it out. But yeah, I'm totally fine with this.
Okay. Install prefix for kernel specs. This is another Thomas PR, but something Thomas and I have been talking about. The question is, what should the default install path be?
Some background, I think, is probably in order here. At present, we have places that we have a system-wide registry for kernel specs, which is in like /user local share IPython kernels on Unix C systems, and we have a per user registry, and we should probably have a per environment registry so that you can install kernels inside contra environments and virtual envs and things. So I made a PR adding that, and I made it so that the environment registry was the default location it would install to. So that's based on Python's sys prefix. And so sys prefix in some cases, well, if you have an environment, sys prefix is, I think, just about always the right place to install into. And if there isn't an environment active, so the tricky thing is we don't have a reliable way of telling sort of independently of environmenting system whether there is an environment active. So in some cases, sys prefix is the right place to install when you don't have an environment. In other cases, it's not. So the current thing kind of uses sys prefix, but special cases, a couple of cases where we know, like Mac system Python sys prefix will be like system libraries, frameworks, Python, version X, whatever. So in those cases, we special case it to fall back on /user/local. Yeah. So the questions are: should the default install location be sys prefix, or should we default to installing to either the system or the user location? Should we have an environment variable that the user can provide, which would specify additional places to look for kernel specs?
Yeah, and when we were kind of thinking through use cases yesterday, it seemed like for kernels that are started with Python, which would be the IPython kernel and the various IPython-based wrapper kernels, installing to sys prefix makes sense. For pretty much anything that starts with without Python, R kernel, Julia kernel, and all those things, it does not make sense to install a sys prefix. With the exception that, like, if you're building an iJulia or IR kernel conda package or something, it makes sense to everything has to go in sys prefix.
Because that's where conda.
Because that's how conda works.
Roots itself. Conda anchors itself on sys.
Conda never writes any files outside of prefix.
Got it.
And so a conda package is right. It's a zip file of files relative to a prefix. But like if I have, in my case, for instance, I have Python in conda, but R not in conda, and then I install the R kernel, it shouldn't go in sys prefix. So I think the last
if you have
place
R inside your conda environment, it should go in sys prefix.
Well, at least if the R kernel is a conda package, it should go in sys prefix. So it seems clear that reading from sys prefix.
If R is installed in your conda environment, then even if you're installing it without a conda package, it still installs the code inside that environment.
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the spec file should always be in the conda environment.
I'm a little. I think it would be preferable if the kernel spec stuff can be orthogonal to the various insanities of packaging. And looking through the pull request here, I'm already seeing stuff where we look to see if it's Darwin and it's the system Python, do one thing, and if it's not, do something else. And that just works. I mean, that is such a rat's nest of logic, and I'm just weary of us starting to build that into our kernel spec architecture. I think I guess I just feel like it should be completely orthogonal to those questions.
Though I'm not sure we're going to get that, Brian, because this is about. This is partly why kind of installation is always such a nightmare, because it's one of those areas where it's impossible to have a clean generic model that once it meets reality, I mean, where would you put things in a way that would be platform independent and independent of where things are installed and whether it's a system like on Mac, whether it's a framework Python, system Python, or a non. I mean, where would we put things to make that? I am with you in the desire. I just don't know that that's possible, realistic. How would you go about designing this to be independent?
So the option to kind of take away our own knowledge of such things is to, at the very least, allow loading from sys.prefix by default. We completely ignore sys.prefix on install, but we take install kernel spec takes a prefix argument.
But then that just means that any kernels which are using Python have to implement the same logic for determining where to install to, as far as I can see.
And potentially get it wrong. There is one advantage to us providing that logic, is that We know that the answer that they get is the answer that we provide.
So and maybe there's an abstraction leak here, and that is I'm wondering if kernel specs, I don't even know how to say this, but it feels like we may be starting to invent a package system for kernel specs, and maybe we should rethink where kernel specs go and just integrate them into other package managers in a full-blown way. I don't. It just there's some abstraction here that's not quite right. I understand that we have to play the game with the package managers, but there's something that's not quite right about this.
Well, I mean, just like the most basic packages, like AutoTools-based things, and even Python pack, like it's kernel specs go in prefix, share, IPython kernels. And the question is, what prefix do we use by default? What prefixes do we support? And I guess a tertiary question is, what do we allow, like a path variable that says just this is where everything is, so that they can install kernels to wherever /my kernels, and then put that on an environment path, which is true of how pretty much everything that loads things can use a path variable to find them.
Yeah. At the same time, in practice, the entity that makes the decision about where things actually go is the package systems, right? I mean, apt-get makes all those choices for you. And
yeah, and if we were only dealing with system and user installation, this is quite easy. I think it's only the fact that we need to deal with environments like contour environments and virtual envs that makes this difficult.
Yeah.
And what environments allow is effectively, they're basically a poor man's solution, or I mean, at this point, it's not such a poor man's because they've put a lot of work into it. But they're basically a solution to the fact that package managers, when they were conceived, were not conceived as user-level tools. They were conceived as root-level tools.
Yeah.
And so, effectively, what environments provide is, without as much robustness for deinstallation and dependencies and whatnot as things like apt-get, user-level package control. And orthogonal and independent package groups, which is another thing that system-level apt, for example, doesn't provide. There's one set of packages and that's it. And there's no way to switch between subsets. And that means that there has to be an additional set of prefixes that have to be communicated to the runtime that take precedence, because these can be provided by the user and they can be swapped. Right? It's that ability for the user to override that without system-level access, and to swap them at runtime, to swap those prefixes.
No, and I mean, and to do that well, we have to start to add all this very subtle logic about trying to infer what Python is being used and what environment. I mean,
terrible. And it's brittle and it's easy to get it wrong.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean,
yeah, I know it's very, very, very brittle logic.
Yeah, part of the trouble is that unless we go into, like, supporting a specific list of environment managers, and looking at the environment variables that we know that conda sets and we know that virtual env sets, sys.prefix is I think the only way we have of telling like what environment we're in, but that gets there's no consistent value of sys prefix that means we're not in an environment, because it could be like wherever Python is installed.
And this won't interfere with people having different kernels set up with different conda environments?
No.
Okay.
No, it affects two things: where we look for kernels and where we install them. The main thing is by default, right? That's what's the appropriate default install.
Yeah.
And there's also the question of, like, are people running IPython across their virtual envs or their conda environments or whatever kind of environments, and are you running IPython outside the environments and starting kernels in different environments, or are you running IPython in a particular environment and you only want to see the kernels that are installed in that environment? And I mean, we can't have a good feel for that yet, because we don't.
Yeah, and that's why we specifically decided we're not going to handle env awareness, at least from the listing perspective.
Yes. Yeah.
So we're not going to support listing and loading kernels from your various environments. That you can create kernel specs that activate an environment and load them, but basically we're not at a point where we can write a first draft of that and make it official. But that's slightly separate from just where do we install things by default, which is a simpler but still not simple problem to solve.
I really don't have a good answer here.
Yeah, honestly,
spin this around in our heads for a while and come back to it.
Yeah. Although honestly, we're probably not going to know the right answer until we just try out different things. I mean,
what's the least committing thing we can try, even if it doesn't give everybody, even if we make sort of some people unhappy in the sense of not providing functionality, what is the solution that commits us the least in terms of doing? I'd rather not offer certain functionality or make the solution for certain functionality clunky than try to offer something more advanced and then realize that we went down kind of a path that proves to be a problem and have to back out of it. Do you guys have a sense of what would be the minimally committing approach?
I would think installing to user local by default.
Uh-huh. I think the only thing we have to support is the ability for people to put kernels when they don't have root access. I think that's a bare minimum.
Yeah, but that's a user install that goes in .IPython.
Okay.
That's actually, I think, the default behavior right now.
Okay.
At the moment, yeah.
Yeah, but I think switching it to system-wide by default, just to match the convention of pretty much everything else in the world, is appropriate. But yeah, so effectively -- user install goes in .IPython. Then supporting a prefix, one or the other of supporting a prefix argument, just a generic prefix argument, which would be how you'd build a conda package, or even a virtual env thing. And then one step farther than that would be specifying explicitly install to whatever sys.prefix is. But I would be inclined to maybe stop at generic prefix value.
So, I mean, generic prefix value has the advantage that is what kind of very old traditional installation processes support. You type, you unpack a tarball from the 90s, dot configure dash dash prefix home USR, and then you have your home USR installed with man and share and lib and include and all that for very old style make files that are built with auto tools.
Yeah.
So
and now, if the path that we search
that's the problem.
is not configurable, then an arbitrary prefix lets you install it in all kinds of places that don't work.
Exactly. So the problem, the trick with that is that dash dash prefix basically prepends prefix to a bunch of variables that all, or to a bunch of systems that all rely on search variables that are environment based. And so there's $path, there's $man path, and include path, and LD library path, and the various things. So you basically know that you can type that configure dash dash prefix whatever, as long as you have those 5 or 6 environment variables configured with that same prefix and the necessary appendages on top, then your various compilations in LaTeX and C and etc. will work. That's kind of how the old school system used. It gave the user the ability to define prefix on the way in, based on the notion that they would have configured their various search paths on the way out. And so whatever they put into their system in that location would be found at runtime and build time and by their tools. So if we allow dash dash prefix at install time, we have to allow the users how to configure that at search and runtime. The way Python does it is Python path honors that. You basically can configure installs setup.py installs with dash dash prefix if you know how to map that to your $Python path variable. So the question,
the other, and there's two, I guess, two logical ways to support a path. One is, since it's prefix style, one is just an unexplicit, kernel spec path that is just the absolute location of everything. The other would be to infer the path, the kernel spec path, from the prefixes of path, the path variable. Right, so path has a bunch of bins on it, and then from that you make the kernel spec path relative to those bins. Go, .share IPython kernels, which is basically how. Not that this is something that one generally uses as an example of good things, but auto tools, when it's looking for stuff,
guess is that way.
When it's trying to find, where might you have installed this library, it infers the various install prefixes you have from path. It's like you've got bins in all these different places.
I'm going to backtrack
then
one.
There's probably libs and includes relative to those. I don't know. I don't know what.
Well, I actually. So here's what I thought. I actually don't particularly like that solution in general. I think it's a little bit ugly. On the other hand, it has the advantage of not committing us yet to an explicit decision on, oh, this is what we're going to offer as the Jupyter path environment variable, and is that going to be current? I'm really afraid of making a commitment to a path variable right now, right before we do the split, the repo split, we have to rethink the management of profiles and stuff that is going to go from IPython to Jupyter and IPython and kernels. I'm afraid there's going to be so much churn on that we might realize that if we define a spec for a Jupyter path or an IPython path kernel variable right now, that's exactly the kind of thing that's going to go out the window in the next release. And so this rather hackish and ugly unwind path, backtrack into something below it, has the advantage that at least it works with what people already have. And so, and it makes it easier that if we decide to rename it to something else or change the logic, only we have to change that logic.
Yeah, I gotta say, I don't think this is getting us to something simple and reliable.
This
sounds even more complicated.
Cross OS package installation. I mean, there's just Nothing pretty about it. Jason is suggesting package config, but package config is package config package Python specific?
No,
No.
it's anything. It's basically a collection of C flags, LD flags, prefix, and it's a generic API for finding out where things were installed.
Yeah. I think
But of course, you have to install package config spec files in order for package config to know where things are.
I mean, I know we don't want to, but I think we're probably just going to have to write a new operating system. I mean,
well, we're going to do it in JavaScript so that it's all.
yes.
JavaScript and Haskell.
I guess there is one thing we could loop back to, and it's not an idea that I much like, but we did discuss, rather than having kernel spec files having executables named with just some convention. So, like, you make an executable named like Jupyter-kernelinfo-Julia or something, and that gives you the information about how to start the Julia kernel. And I mean,
and we scan.
But then we could just, everything apart from R has a way of installing a command line program.
Oh, R does not?
No, because
it's R.
Because it's R. And I mean, that would let us just use the path, the executable path.
So we would say for kernel foo, you have to install Jupyter-kernel spec-foo somewhere in path, and then we call that, and that thing has to return what? Maybe a JSON blob to standard out that we can then parse.
Yeah, I guess that's how it
would. That be? Yeah. The naming convention is yes, Jason. It's exactly like Git.
Yeah, we're going to have to do what Git does for subcommands anyway. Once.
Yeah. I mean, it's
not pretty, but maybe. Yeah.
But we will still need to implement the code for walking path and globbing files to find these.
Yeah, but we've already actually implemented that in find command.
Yeah.
Not the globbing part, but yeah, that's not a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Lots of people have the find this command if it exists. We need to have find all of these.
Yeah.
All of these commands.
But that's not.
Yeah, it's not terribly hard, and it may also be somewhat difficult on Windows. I don't know. I guess, yeah, things could write .cmd files. That's easy enough, I guess.
Yeah, that's an idea. I would be, and because it does deal with the prefix thing kind of nicely, right? Because then if you just create a new kernel spec and put it on the front of your path, it's the priority kernel spec.
Yeah. We piggyback on the fact that the one thing most people know how to configure is path. Like what I was describing with -- prefix, very few people actually know what all those variables have to be and know how to do that correctly. And path is about the one thing that people have some knowledge of how to configure.
So Matthias on Gitter says, that's just crazy. We should sleep on it and move on for now.
I mean, it's not Matthias. It's not totally crazy. It is what Git does.
Sorry, Matthias. There's a storm in California, and we all woke up and had vodka this morning. We're
Yeah, it's the wind. The winds are sucking the oxygen out of the atmosphere, and
that's why I'm deciding to come, and I will come to experience all that with you.
Okay, I think he does have a point, though.
Let's
we
think,
should-
Yeah.
let's think about it.
Background
But
thread.
yeah, this last one is at least something to think about, and unfortunately,
Yeah.
this is why package installation and management drives grown adults to tears. I mean, this stuff, there's just no way out, no way to come out of this shit. Good shape. It's impossible.
Thank you, Matthias. Yes.
Yeah. Good call.
All right,
Pulled us out of the rabbit hole.
moving on.
Oh, the next one's Kyle. Is Kyle still not?
Oh,
Let's keep it.
let's keep it. Can you hop in?
No, isn't it full?
I just want to rebrand NBViewer to have a more Jupiter-y name. And we just have proposal of logo, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, ignoring all the proposals for the logo, but
Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, what do we?
Okay.
none of those are serious, right?
Yes. Well, I certainly hope the Eye of Sauron is not.
Exactly. That's
Hey, Kyle's in. There's Kyle.
Alright.
Hey, Kyle.
I don't know how out of sync I was with the YouTube video.
No, we were just laughing at your Eye of Sauron.
My what?
The Eye of Sauron.
Oh gosh.
so I mean, why is it not just Jupiter and BViewer?
You mean
That's what it is now.
nbviewer.jupiter.brian, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
nbviewer. Yeah. The one thing we will have to do, and we're kind of committed to this, is we will have to maintain nbviewer.ipython.org at least as a stable redirect forever and ever.
Yeah, that's not a big deal.
That's easy enough.
Yeah, there's so many URLs already out there for the .ipython nbviewer but we can make it a full persistent redirector.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we had talked about for hosting, like GitHub does with pages, putting things that are non-IPython, non-Jupyter content, user content.
Yeah.
Right, putting those on a different domain, which would mean NBViewer should be on a different domain, different top level, or not top level, different.
We have already nbviewer.org. I mean, we have it. It redirects to nbviewer.ipython.org, and it's much shorter. And I don't understand why we don't use it. Like official URL. It's nbviewer.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of like the simplicity of that.
Put NBViewer and NBViewer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why not?
Kyle, is there a reason why not?
It's gonna be well branded, and we can.
We're going to redirect all of the other two to it then. Not a-
That's fine.
yeah. Yeah, I see no problem there.
Okay.
That lets us do other wildcard things. It's actually nicer to have things on single domains, because then we don't have to have like a nested wildcard. And if you try to buy certs, you can only get wildcard certs at the So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. By the way, if anyone has ideas about new domains and whatnot, please never say them on the public meeting. They'll get snagged before we're done. So, just as a heads up.
Nah, I got nothing.
Okay.
Okay, widget warning on import. Is it too much? Jonathan, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I'm just plugging in my headphones. There's some people outside the hall.
No worries. What's up?
So we've currently got a warning on import of widgets.
Hello?
Yeah, go for it.
Hey. So, yeah, recently, after talking to Brian, I added a warning. So when you import the widgets, it says, this is an experimental API. And we're just not sure if that's too much, because people use those so often now. And so we're thinking about alternatives, possible alternatives.
Isn't
One-
people using them a lot kind of why it needs to be clear that it's an experimental API?
Yeah,
I guess the warning's probably in the wrong place too. So if somebody was running this as an admin for people, it's going to end up at the server side, and the users won't know.
Oh, that's fixed now.
Oh, okay. You can use that too.
Yeah,
so
that,
it actually
was
shows
in-
up on Notebook.
Oh, it shows up in the notebook. So now it's definitely too much. Okay.
Yeah.
no, it's deliberately meant to be annoying.
so nobody should use widgets, right?
I want people to make a conscious choice of, oh, I'm willing to be annoyed to use widgets while they're in this experimental state.
I think it has to populate a widget that lets you crank it up to 11. Anyway, sorry.
But I almost feel like mostly of what's experimental is not just the Hello World widget experience. Like, I mean, how much is that going to change? Even if we like completely redo the internals of the widget, like we completely refactor it.
I just don't. I don't think. I don't know. I just don't know what is and is not going to survive. I mean, I don't imagine us throwing everything out, but are we going to throw out and change 10% of it, 15% of it? And
I
also,
think one of the things we need to convey is that widget will be a separate package. That's mostly, I think, why we have this message. Like, it's in IPython for now, but it might not be in the future. That's why it's really experimental. I mean, you're importing in this now from IPython, but later it won't be in IPython anymore. And maybe we should just rephrase the message.
Yeah, maybe that's a good idea.
To be just more welcoming. I mean, widget will be moved out of IPython and things like that, but not removed.
well, but I think even after they're moved, they will be in an experimental state, and part of what's tough is that from our perspective, having the repo separate gives us the freedom we want to have it be experimental. From a user's perspective, all they're going to know is that they downloaded Anaconda and IPython and widgets work. And so the packaging of it from the user's perspective is irrelevant.
This is Jason there.
Yeah, Jason just
Maybe.
joined. Jess dropped out.
So another alternative that Jason suggested is just moving the widgets out before 3.0.
No, because we need to move traitlets and everything out. It would be too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's, and also I don't think, I mean, there's two issues here. One is for us, right? That we want to evolve widgets at a faster pace than IPython, and having them as separate repos enables us to do that. The user experience is completely separate and unrelated to which repo the code lives in.
No, it's not.
Well,
it is not. If people start doing a widget now and they have to move all their code later because they didn't knew it was going to move somewhere else, it is a big deal. Unless we had a shim in IPython that when you import ipython.html.widget, which by the way is much too long, will import the widget package and do all the shim, and then we are doomed forever because we need to support that.
Yeah.
So we have to warn at some point the user, like, we don't commit to have exactly this code working because it will be refactored, it will be moved out. I think a rephrasing of the warning would be enough, and maybe not, I don't know, something more friendly. Maybe you can show a pony, like, we are sorry, we show you a pony, and
Maybe we could show it.
Hey, we're being annoying, but here's ponies!
We could include Unicode Snowman in the warning message. Maybe that's for this API is frozen. Unicode Snowman.
Yeah, we can't give you a stable API, but we can give you ponies.
I mean, it seems like the conflict right now is that you guys are saying this is an unstable API, and we want to warn people in an annoying way that it is an unstable API, so that they don't ignore that fact. Oh, wait a minute, we're informing people in an annoying way. It's annoying.
Yeah.
Right?
And maybe that's why we need to just add ponies to the mix to make them laugh while we're annoying them.
Yeah, and part of it is that you're annoying yourselves. Right?
We could embed the YouTube video with 10 hours of pink fluffy unicorns.
Actually, to keep it from being annoying, we could actually say we could change the thing we're giving them. So and pull it at random. So one time it could be a snowman, the next time it could be a pony, the next time it could be a unicorn. They'll never know what they're going to get annoyed by.
Could we get away with showing the error once, like per user?
No, I don't think that's annoying enough. I don't know. I mean,
you guys basically need to make a call. Do you want to be annoyed the way you are now, or not, and just put that warning in the docs, and that's it. And I know, yes, I know people don't read docs, etc., etc.
Yeah, I haven't actually imported it with the warning yet, and so I'm not sure that I have a good sense of.
We could, to make sure that it's super experimental, on import, so the IPython.html.widgets actually only has the warning, but the module with widget definitions actually is interactively a runtime-defined module with a hash in the name. You actually have to copy and paste text out of the warning in order to import the real widgets.
Oh, you
Okay,
have to
come
use
on.
widgets so that it
That's
has
horrible.
to, like, you have to play a little game or something. You have to do a captcha.
People, we need to try to make a decision here.
Okay, let's just do the ponies then.
Like a captcha, is IPython with an uppercase or lowercase I?
I like just rephrasing, maybe just rephrasing the
If you get
message.
it wrong, it just wipes your hard drive.
So, Jonathan, how would you rephrase it?
Just like Matthias said, just rephrase it. Say, hey, these are going to be moved around, and they're not going to go away, right? I mean, because right now, when you read it right now, it's almost like, oh well, I can't use widgets at all because they might disappear completely.
Okay. So basically, make it clear: this functionality will continue existing. The actual code imports
Might change.
and API may change.
But I don't.
Okay,
I
do you
don't.
want to just? But that still doesn't solve the problem. Do you guys want to see that red text on import or not?
And honestly, I think that doesn't communicate the most useful information to the user, and that is that if they use this, 6 months from now, they're going to have to change their code.
No. That's what I meant. Having a sentence that says the functionality will continue to exist. The code, the imports.
Yeah,
and
the
the
syntax
APIs,
might change.
Syntax and the APIs will change. No, it's explicitly communicating that.
Yep.
You know, on the other hand, or can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Jason.
If we split them out before 3.0, then we can just say this is the version that works with IPython 3.0, and we can continue developing things. And it's a separate repo, in some sense, a separate project. It's easier for us to maintain because it's already split out. At least the changing of the repos is before 3.0. And we get to stress test, people installing their own widgets because we're eating our own dog food there.
I'm not sure we can split for 3.0. There is too much things to do to have the widget, which is a totally separate repo.
Yeah, I don't see that as being.
Because we need to solve the JavaScript installation problem. We have too much things for splitting that in a month, because like we have only maybe a little more than a month left for release. I don't think it's feasible.
Jason, I think you're correct in principle, but it's one of those things. If we keep, we're never going to get 3.0 out if we keep doing stuff, and it's going to have to be. We're going to have to live with imperfection if we ever want to see 3.0 out the door. We're becoming the new scientific compute. That's
On the other hand, you'd be amazed at what we can do in a few days. Jonathan's a coding all-star. But at the same time, I don't know that we need to put a warning in there, because it will be split out after 3.0, which means if you use these widgets as part of IPython, they are gone right now from dev master and living in their own project. I mean, and what's the point of an experimental warning, because we've already completely deleted them the week that they're using them.
I'm not sure I follow
that's kind of what we're warning them about.
Yeah, it's kind of telling them that will happen.
Yeah, but again, it's not. I mean, Scott Sanderson said this on Gitter. It's not just about the code location. It's about the API changing as well, and we have to communicate both of those things.
No, but that's what we said. I mean, when we said that Jonathan would rephrase the warning, it would be communicating both. It's not. It's that you would import them from some other location, and the APIs themselves will potentially be different. It's both facts.
But this is why I think simply splitting widgets off before 3.0 doesn't solve the problem, because we still have to warn people that even in that new repo, the API is going to change.
But you can easily do that, because you can say the IPython repo version 1.0 works with IPython 2.0, and of course it's going to change. I mean, projects evolve, right? So this version works with IPython 3.0, and great. The next version of the IPython widgets repo will work with IPython 3.5. And so it's just a dependency tracking problem between two separate projects that you don't need to warn users of a project that may eventually change. Does that make sense?
No,
well, but it's kind of changing backwards. That's the policy that Python has for the standard library, for example, is that when they have APIs that they know, I mean, when they put APIs into the standard library, sure, they can evolve, but they tend not to evolve in backwards incompatible ways unless they find a catastrophic problem. And we know this is going to evolve in a backwards incompatible way.
And even if it's a separate package, we're not expecting people to write a set of widgets and then, keep using old versions of IPython just so they don't have to change their widget code. We're expecting them to upgrade, and then they will have to change their widget code.
I think the solution is pretty simple then. We just call this IPython 2.0 widgets, and the next one will be IPython 3.0 widgets.
Well, I would make the widgets like 0.1 when they get split,
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Because widgets are far from a stable version. So
I was referring to Python 2, Python 3.
Yeah.
You can make it backwards incompatible releases.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Python has made one backwards incompatible release, and 6 years later, we still haven't moved. So, I'm a Python 3 fan, and I wouldn't say that's a great example.
Yeah, it did not go.
That was part of the
of how to successfully manage that transition. Okay, so let's try to make a decision on this so we finish. It's already been an hour and a half. Do we just want to do that rewording, and everyone is clear that if it's reworded, it has to indicate what Scott said on the Gitter, right? That it's both location and API. And with that side, because honestly, as much as Jason's arguments are very reasonable, jumping into a repo split right now is just not in the cards. We need to land an ugly reality and live with it. Hey, it gives us something to make people happy about next year.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay, let's just go with that.
I am curious. Would you guys be willing to accept the pull request for a repo split?
No.
No.
I mean, it's a matter of ripple impact. It's one of those classic, I promise it's not going to break, it can't possibly break anything, and then you keep finding stuff that, oh shit, we hadn't realized that this would impact that.
That's why I asked.
Yeah, and that cascade, and I've seen that happen with like one-line typo fixes, and you don't realize that a one-line typo fix has a weird impact somewhere else. And putting that on our plate close to release, right around the holidays, with Matthias in the middle of sorting out his travel from Europe to the U.S., and with me now having a job at LBL and being even less available, at least for the next few weeks, it's just bad timing. So I'm really sorry. I mean, I know you mean well, and I know that your arguments actually do make a lot of sense, but it's one of those finite resources situations.
Well, actually, quick question. Could we just make, for those of us that use it constantly or embed widgets in something else, could we make a config option to disable the warning? But you could
You can silence warnings with a, with a warning context. So it's
Yeah, warning. I mean,
Oh, okay. No, I wasn't aware of that.
yeah, you can put that in your startup file, your kernel, in your profile, and have all your Python processes start with that warning disabled. That's the beauty of warning stuff.
Used again.
Right now it uses the IPython utils warning, which is not the Python warning.
No, it should be a regular Python warning.
Right.
Oh,
You can easily turn it off.
Yeah,
But there's
definitely be a regular warning.
in the utility warnings file saying we should use Python warnings instead of our own homegrown implementation.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. I didn't realize that was the case. I'm sorry. I had no idea that this was a home. No. It should use the standard one so people can disable with the normal mechanisms, which means you can disable it in your profile and be done with it.
Okay.
See you, Matthias.
Hi, Matthias.
All right.
See ya.
JS Dog. Hey, hadn't we agreed already that it was going to be the second kind?
Oh,
Because
a tidbit of information about that.
We learned that it was worse than we thought it was.
Yeah.
Sorry?
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit of extra information
Okay.
showed up. So there are two possibilities. The first is to have the docstring above the function signature. When you can have a real nice simple docstring if you do that. But if you want to put the dot comment below the signature, you have to include the information that tells JS where that comment is, because it only looks below. So yeah, you can put comments wherever you want. In fact, you don't even have to have code, but you have to, if you do that, you have to use that special JSDoc tags that describe where.
Yeah,
Now,
basically,
is that the only tag? Is that the only tag? That at function module whatever that I'm highlighting?
Yeah, that's all we need.
The question is, our choices between the docstrings we want or where we want.
Yes.
We can't have both.
But, I mean, it is possible. I have already wrote an extension. There is a third option is to write a nasty hack that moves all JSDoc comments up one line. And then we could kind of have both. But if we had like a multi-line signature, then that would be a disaster.
No, let's not.
It's about choice, and all the choices are bad.
Yeah, all the choices are bad. That is inarguable.
Political party.
So back when we had this decision, people seemed really wanting to have the signature below the docstring below the signature, kind of Python style, just because of the kind of the readability in big code files of function signatures, hitting the function signatures first. If it's only that one line, if it's not like you have to replicate everything, if it's only that one line, are people willing to live with that, with having that line duplicated there? I mean, having to copy and paste that is not.
No. I think I prefer that. I think the readability of having the comments below is significantly better, and I'm willing to pay that small price for it.
I'm exactly the opposite. I feel like in the JavaScript community, I mean, everybody expects the comments above the signatures, and I think if we want JavaScript developers to be happy in our JavaScript code base, we should just do what they all do.
What the JavaScript community does, which is signatures signatures below,
Yeah.
comments above.
I don't see a big difference in readability of above versus below, but I think the reason we wanted them below was then they show up. If you inspect the function and you see the source code, then you see the comment included in that.
But like Matthias said, you can inspect the function and then navigate to the line that the function is declared and just scroll up and see. You just don't get it in the console interactively.
Yeah. Yes, you can do lots of things, but I mean, it makes it that step.
That extra step.
Basically, the JavaScript community adopted a shitty convention, is what it is. Because it's a convention that is ugly, that is unreadable, and that leads to poor interactivity. So the JavaScript community adopted a terrible convention. The question
They adopted JavaScript. That's the worst convention they adopted.
Yeah, well, yeah, and maybe that should go without saying because it is JavaScript after all. So the question, but we're not going to get rid of JavaScript. That's just not in the cards, right? Mm-hmm. So the question is really, do we try to tweak things in JavaScript to our liking, or do we just cave in and go with what they do in general? Which is, I think, Jonathan, what you're advocating. And
yeah.
Before it seemed like we had found a reasonable compromise that would keep us Python people reasonably happy without breaking too much. I'm talking about, well, Jason, we're talking specifically about the convention on how to handle doc strings here. But yes, it's a reflection of the bigger lack of taste in that community. So now I'm starting to kind of lean towards what Jonathan is saying, because in general, I do know that in the end, it's kind of a losing battle to go against the convention, the well-established conventions of a big community. It's like, I don't know how Google handles it. For example, I know that at least their old Python style guides used to be that code at Google was indented with two spaces instead of 4, probably because the very first scripts at Google 15 years ago were written that way. It's got to be a load of fun at Google to have basically their Python code follow a convention that nobody else in the world uses, right? Living inside of a community with a homebrewed convention that no one else uses is a problem. We do know that we're going to have to bring more front-end people into the project, and we want to attract good front-end people. We would like to. I would like to have world-class UI, UX, JavaScript front-end people wanting to work with us. And if they come and they say, "What the hell are you guys doing with the language? Nobody writes JavaScript this way. This isn't how the tooling works." We may even start breaking. I don't know, but I could imagine IDEs for JavaScript understanding the natural JS doc and knowing how to find tooltips and whatnot and format them well. But if we put them in an awkward place, maybe they won't find it.
Yeah, I use extensions for Sublime that do that, and it doesn't work beneath the signature. So, like, all that junk that's typed, I don't type it. I just / and it fills it in.
So, I think we're just going to have to cave in and go with... So, and Min, you really don't want the machine, the add garbage, which... So quick kind of show of hands. I know Brian leans towards 2, right?
Yeah.
Everyone else seems to be leaning towards 1. Not that anyone is happy here. I'm not asking, like, I know that none of us particularly likes.
At no point have I been happy working with the JavaScript.
Exactly. Well established.
Yeah, we're in the land of unhappy compromises here. Brian leans towards 2. Everyone else is leaning towards 1. I'm kind of leaning towards 1 as well, just on the follow the community. Brian, how unhappy would we make? How quickly do you think you'd be able to kind of get used to, whatever? Yeah, I also I completely prefer the model of putting the signature below. So I'm with you on vastly preferring that. But the combination of the funky act thing, and especially my concern with breaking norm on a community that we want to work with.
Yeah. So one question. Are we going to end up adding that funky line eventually to the comments above anyway, just to get them to format nicely?
Oh, I thought if it was above, you didn't need that line.
No, yeah, if it's above, you don't need it.
Well, you don't need it, but it's my understanding that if we just type freeform comments, they're not going to be formatted as nicely as if we put in the actual funky JS doc syntax all over the place.
You
Oh,
at
yeah,
least get,
for
you get the
command
signature.
Stuff.
You at least get the signature. Like, this is the function. And then you get just a prose block.
Yeah, there are other tags we can use if you want to, like documents for specific parameters and things, but that specific one is just like associate this comment with this function.
Yeah. And part of it is, I mean, I'm fine going along with the majority here, but if we're eventually going to write all this nasty JS doc syntax anyway, we might as well have the comments below where we enjoy them.
I hope we never do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, Brian, we had sort of agreed that we were going to somewhat go with the flow to support the basic tooling, but not
Okay.
go with all of that gonky markup. That seemed to be one bridge too far for us to cross.
All right.
So we would basically go with what's on Hackpad as number one, right? Kind of on top, no funky markup, just a one-line shorthand description, and then kind of just text in. Okay. It's JavaScript, people.
Woohoo!
Okay, next dev meeting. Oh yeah, I guess we should look at a calendar real quick.
Oh wow. William Stein has open sourced Sage Math Cloud.
Yeah.
It's GPL. Don't look too hard.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad I didn't go to campus. I switched to look at my calendar, and I just saw that Hearst, which is one of the streets that borders campus, is already closed. Probably, I don't know, trees or something. So it sounds like it's already pretty bad up there. Next dev meeting. Let's see. So today is the 11th. Is there any reason not to have one next week?
No. We're talking about the dev meeting. Like
the all hands
person.
the all hands dev meeting. Well, yeah, it's a little tricky. Let's think about that. Yeah, Brian. Let's think about this maybe a little bit later, because we also need to. We're going to have to look very carefully at the budget situation. We're a little constrained right now in that because the next round of grants is most likely going to arrive in the spring. We're effectively coasting on we're running on fumes right now, and so I don't know. Let's take this offline and we'll look at budgets.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Yeah,
That's it.
this was a long one. Thanks, everyone. See you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tara.